Hello, this is Daryl Ehrlich, and this is the Billings Gazette Vietnam Voices series, a series by the Billings Gazette, sponsored by Master Lube. And today, I am very lucky. We've got a very special story for you. Richard E. Tangel, he was with the U.S. Army from 1967 to 1968, and he did something that we haven't talked about before on this series. We've talked about combat. We've talked about the southern part of what was then South Vietnam, but some of the things that he did are pretty unique, and I'm not going to steal any more of his thunder, but I'd like to thank him for coming in and being a part of this. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Well, let's start. If you've listened to these or heard these, I start at the beginning because that's a good place to begin. What was life for you like before 1967? What were you doing right leading up to that, and how did you get in the Army?
I was going to the Ohio State University, Columbus, Ohio, and I had worked, which turned out to be a mistake, 2 quarters, and I didn't know that that changed your category with the draft board. It was called an interrupted education. So I had the physical, and they said, well, you're on our list to be drafted. And I said, well, can I sign a paper? I'm close to graduating. Nope.
Wow.
And so some friends of mine were down at Lockbourne Air Force Base, and they're in the Air National Guard. And they said, come on down here and just join the Guard, and you just keep going to school. And I said, okay, well, that's good. So I went down. It's all military. They swore me in, gave me my jacket with the fur collar and all. And I got a call from them a couple days later. They said, you got to bring all that back. The draft board's claiming they sent a notice in the mail before you took the pledge. And they were that short on getting their quota. So I had to return all that.
Wow. And
I talked to the draft board about, and this all happened getting close to Christmas. So it keeps Christmas special in my mind. So I told the draft board that I'd like to go to Connecticut, where my parents lived, and dump some of my stuff. And they said, no, that's fine. You can report up there to the draft board as soon as you get there. Because I was into hunting, fishing, camping, trapping, and I had possessions. I put some stuff in storage because I was 24 years old at this time.
Right, you were close to grad. What were you graduate? What were you studying?
A bachelor's degree in business.
Okay.
And so to make a long story short, I went to Connecticut, and the draft board said, well, when do you want to go in? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we have no shortage of people. So I just took a couple weeks off and then went in on a train, went through New York City. They picked up more guys. Had some pretty rough individuals. They had guys that actually jumped off the train at different stops because they took us down to Fort Jackson and Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And we got off the train. We had 2 DIs, drill instructors, and they were both drunk. They had just finished a class, and they weren't supposed to get another class. So they started in on us, and one guy started throwing up blood. So they put us in a wooden barracks, had a potbelly stove. This was winter, and there's a pile of coal and some newspapers, and the windows are nailed open, so you get a cross draft. And we were freezing our butts off, so you slept in your clothes, and there was one blanket. And the next day, he said, we're putting you on buses. And turned out this kid that was injured internally, apparently, was connected somewhere. So they sent us to North Carolina, Fort Bragg. These drill instructors were what you would expect, like more professional, but still drill instructors. So I did Fort Bragg. That was your basic. Then when you graduated from that, you went to advanced infantry training, and that was going to be Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is strictly for Vietnam. So you knew what was going on there.
Right.
And I went through that at Louisiana, got pneumonia somehow, and they put you in a hospital. The doctor wasn't available. It was like a Friday. They get you up at 3 in the morning and change your sheets because they're soaking wet. Doctor was coming in Monday. And if you missed graduation, which was going to be that week, you went recycled back in through the whole thing again. So I went in the restroom and coughed up phlegm, drank cold water, tried to get my fever down, got rid of all I could, and went in and saw him just as bright and cheery and said, I don't know why I'm here, I feel great. So I graduated, got back to Connecticut with a still had a fever.
Wow.
And got some aspirin. Is it wonder some people don't like basic training? So that was, do you want me to go what happened after that?
Yeah, so you get back, were you, I got a question for you. You know, you were thinking that you were going to be fine, going to graduate. Was Vietnam, you're older, was Vietnam even on your radar in 1966? Was it even something that you were considering?
Well, you're reading about the draft and the quotas. I figured they called it the New Action Army, and what they were doing with the New Action Army is if you had education, then you should be in combat. This is the way I understood it. If you weren't very well educated, then the Army should train you so you could have something to do. And I know I had a black fella in my barracks, and he was from somewhere down south, I can't remember, but he had trouble tying his boots, and I'd help him tie his boots. He came to me and he said, they're putting me into engineers. He said, what am I going to do? Because he had practically no education. I said, well, they'll teach you to be an engineer.
Right.
You know, I'm going to be 11 Bravo. And that's how it was kind of split up. So, but I knew that when I got out of college, you could go to Canada or get married, or you're going in the service. And I wasn't about to get married or go to Canada.
Okay.
And my father had been in the Second World War, so, and I was too old to be acting like a 17 or 18-year-old anyway.
Right, right. So you kind of accepted that probably one way or another you're gonna
that was going to happen.
Right. Were you afraid of Vietnam at the time? I mean, it was escalating, but not quite to the point. I mean, 67, 68. Much was it something that was is it a scary prospect, or is it just what it is?
Well, you just have to accept it. I had a lot of hunting, camping, fishing, ran a trap line in high school, so the outdoors were something I was familiar with. I'd used weapons quite a bit. So I thought I had that advantage, and as it turned out, I did over some people that they just had training with a rifle, and they'd never been outside other than in training, and that was a real shock to be put out in the woods at night, and there's things going on. So I just sort of, what are you going to do? That's it.
Yeah. So let's. So you are trained in AIT 11 Bravo. That is infantry. So you're trained on rifle. What specialty? Any other specialty that you got in AIT, or what were you what was your? What'd you learn how to do, or what were you technically qualified to do?
Well, after Fort Polk, which was known as the Armpit of America, I got orders to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to armor training, and so some friends of mine took me down there and left me off, and I was trained to drive an APC, Armored Personnel Carrier, 12 tons of aluminum. And that was probably the most enjoyable experience in the military, was driving around in that big thing, driving over trees. And you can float. They also float. And they have a sump pump in them, or a bilge pump. And we got to run all over. And I mean, that was kind of a joy. Plus, I think at my age, I just didn't blindly obey or take things that were thrown at you. So I said, they're going to have a big inspection, and the colonel's going to have white gloves, and this is like a big machine, and you got to have it so clean. If he finds any grease or any dirt, it's trouble. So I just took mine and I put it down at the end of the line and hung a sign on it, deadline, and that meant it had a mechanical problem and it wouldn't be inspected, and I went and drank beer. But see, that's, but what are they going to do? Send you to Vietnam? You know, I mean, what are they going to do? Yell at you? Send you? So,
right.
So that was fun. I mean, it's kind of a joke.
Right. Do you think that and this is probably a question that maybe we should ask even later, did being 24 at least help you more than, say, being 18? I mean, was your age a credit to you, you think?
Oh, yes. You're more mature, you're more settled down, and I think you understand things better, and you certainly don't blindly obey an order that could get you killed. Mm-hmm. And I did refuse, and people did get killed. Yeah. You know.
So after you get trained APC and then you get your, I'm guessing you got your orders for, since you're going to Fort Polk, you got your orders for Vietnam.
Yeah, already knew.
Okay, so where were those orders, and where did you, tell me about leaving the U.S.?
Well, I went to Oakland and met a friend up there who had been in basic training with me, and he was handling who was getting on the next plane. So I got some idea of when my time was coming. And you're put together with just a bunch of guys, mm-hmm. and they do everything alphabetically in the Army. So I was with a guy that later got wounded severely, Wayne Takahata from Hawaii, because Tangel, Takahata. Mm-hmm. It's a no-brainer. So we messed around up at Oakland. You couldn't leave the base. And you had a duffel bag with clothes in it. You had your dress uniform stuff in there and your civilian-looking shoes, which by the time I got out of Vietnam, they had turned green with mold. So they were totally useless. All that stuff got wet in the Mekong Delta. Flew out of Oakland, stopped at Hawaii for 20 minutes, so I did get to see Hawaii.
Right, for 20, all of it, 20 glorious minutes.
It's on my bucket list. It's not that far away. And flew over Wake Island and then did a circle job and came down, and I believe we landed in Benoit, as I can remember. And they lined you up and they took, this group's going to the 24th, this group's going to the Big Red One, next 5 are going to the Mekong Delta, the 9th Division. That's how they did it. And right then I knew, well, this is another snafu. Okay. Because I'm trained to drive APCs, and obviously I'm not going to be driving any APCs.
Right.
And that's what you call a snafu.
Right. Was that, that had to be disappointing?
No, it's just, you know, after you're in the military and you've gone through that much training, you're well into whatever it is. There's nothing you can do about it. So. Yeah.
Well, that seems like a pretty mature response, too. You know, for it doesn't sound like an 18-year-old response. It sounds like more like a 24-year-old response.
Yeah.
Did you? What's your impression? You land in Vietnam. What's your impression of it?
Well, like every article, I think you've asked that question of everybody that went to Vietnam, because I've read the Gazette articles before. You know, you're getting off a air-conditioned airliner, and you're into it's hot and humid, but I'd been in Ohio for a long time, and it's hot and humid in the summer, same type of thing.
And you were in Louisiana, although probably during the...
Yeah, Louisiana is supposed to be closer to what you're going to see in Vietnam, and they try to make it, but nothing is like it really is. They try to do a good job, but hot and humid, smelly, you know, equipment bustling around, and as I remember, there was no artillery going off or anything until they got to shipped down in trucks and down to Dong Tam, which is outside the major city in South Vietnam, My Tho. And Dong Tam was being built as I was there, dredged out of the Mekong River to get it above the water level. And so it was muddy, dusty. I came in close to evening, and some sergeant put me over. He said, they're out on the boats now. We have to wait till morning. And there was artillery going off. And you just sort of look around. You know, you got a rifle, you got a duffel bag. So you know nothing. You're waiting to see what's going to happen next.
Was it a shock to hear artillery coming in? Like you got there and already you got artillery, right?
Yeah, that was artillery going out. The incoming, they had an alarm they had set off. And they usually rocketed us incoming. Okay. And everything at this time was tents, looked like an old MASH movie. Okay. Tents with sandbags around them to a certain height to catch the shrapnel. If you got a direct hit, that's it. It's over with. And we would build bunkers. The CBs were there, and they had some pretty good-sized wood and lots of sandbags to be filled. So you're always doing something. It's not like in the movies where you're hanging out somewhere, drinking beer, smoking pot, and everybody's having a good time and listening to music. This place was primitive. Yeah. Some of those base camps had massage parlors and everything you could think of, big PXs. This was primitive. So I waited until I could get out to the ships, and then you meet the men. You're a new guy, and you have to know how that works. But we were, within 2 weeks, we were in a major battle that was written up in the magazines and books. And you just, go with the old guys, do what they say to do. And
is that what's being you said you have to know what being a new guy means. What does it mean?
Well, the guys that were there, they all came from Fort Riley, Kansas, and they came over as a group. They all knew each other. They'd trained together. Their officers had been with them all that time. Now you're just a replacement. It's like walking into a club where everybody's together and you're trying to make friends. But the good thing is most people aren't going to treat you like, say, oh, that's the new guy. And right. They're going to show you things. And you don't know everything when you get there. You've had training, but they really know. Yeah. And they'll tell you, different things like, don't ever even walk around back in there. That's too brushy, because the VC would take a frag grenade and stick it in a sea ration can, pull the pin, so it's in there with the spoon. So when you pull the pin, the spoon comes off, that starts the fuse burning. So it'd be in a can. The cans, all the Army sea rations, all are olive drab, so that's good camouflage. Run a fishing line over to another point, and it's monofilament. It's very hard to see. You trip that, the grenade pops out. You'll hear the spoon twang, and you got just enough time to hit the ground, and if you don't hear it, then you're out of there. Yeah. But booby traps.
Was that the best advice that the old guys gave you?
No, it was constant. It was a learning experience. If you weren't willing to learn and listen, you're nuts. We got one guy in, and he kept saying, I'm supposed to be in rockets. I'm supposed to be in rockets. I'm not supposed to be out here in the field. And I said, yeah, I'm supposed to be driving an APC, but you're out in the field, and so am I. Now, he's the first guy that stepped in a punji pit, which was kind of stupid, because if you had any knowledge of walking around out in the bush, you could usually spot a punji pit. And that was the end of him, because you get those things stuck in your leg, and you usually had feces on them, and you're going to be infected. And so he was out, never saw him again. But that kind of attitude, you're alert all the time. If you aren't alert, you're going to die. And I walked point for 4 months. Yeah. You better be alert.
Did you find, first of all, primitive conditions and then doing things like where you had to watch where you step, did you feel you were well prepared, not necessarily because of the training, but because of your background in hunting outdoors? How did that affect you, do you believe?
A definite advantage, because I'd tracked animals and, looked for things on the ground. You could tell where something had been through here. If you came right out of the city, you were at a disadvantage. And somebody with any rank should then keep you from not being in a position where you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
They wanted the new guys on point. Now, when I say I was on point for 4 months, that doesn't mean every day I walked point, because sometimes you weren't in a moving situation, or your platoon wasn't going to be on point. But for 4 months, when it was our turn, I was always on point. And I can remember feeling something on my boot, and I stopped, and there was a tripwire. I was watching it. It goes over here, and there up in the tree was a claymore mine, as I remember, about this big, aiming at the trail. So by being more alert, I'm talking to you, because that thing was a monster.
Yeah, yeah. Does that has to stop you kind of cold in your tracks when you realize what that is, right? I mean,
oh yeah, you're like, shit, I'm glad I didn't take another step.
Yeah, one step.
Yeah, one step. And on the other side of the canal from us was a different unit, and they were hitting these toe poppers, I think they called them. It was a little pressure mine that would just blow part of your foot off, and you'd hear a bang and a guy scream. And that was going on over there, and I'm on point on this other side, and the captain called up and said, stay off the trail. Well, you're back in the brush, or you're on the trail. On the trail, it's like summer in Montana where the mud turns to concrete. You can see if anything's been disturbed. You can see everything on a trail. So I stayed on the trail, but I didn't move real fast. Sometimes they want you to move faster. That's as fast as I'm moving, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
yeah, that's, let's talk a little bit about, so how long after you'd gotten there did it take for you to get on a ship? Because you're on something that's kind of interesting that not a lot of people know about down in the South, in the Mekong. Explain that. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I went out the next morning. What they had is World War II barrack ships, like you had the invasion of Omaha Beach and all. They're just troop carriers. You had all the troops down below. The Navy was up on top. They'd have some 40 millimeters, and I mean, it's just a transport ship. But it was air conditioned, and they had a heck of a galley. I mean, they even had ice cream. And hooked to the ship was a big pontoon, and that's where all your web gear, grenades, your ammo, your rifle were left. You couldn't come on the ship with weapons, which was a good idea. So on the side of the pontoon then were the landing craft, the monitors, and the gunboats that we'd operate off of. And it was tight fitting down in there, but you know, you're in a ship. Every night they would slip the anchors and float down the Mekong River and then drop the anchors, because the BC would try to target those ships, but not in the daytime. That could be foolhardy. But at night they'd try to do it, and then the ship wouldn't be there anymore because it's pitch black. And they ran gunboats around these ships all night long, and a big glop of lily pads would come floating down. They'd throw a grenade in it. So you'd hear this thump, you know, through the hull of the ship, and that would go on all night. So it was a different world. You had the land base, and you had the ships to operate off of, which was strictly get up at 3 in the morning to get you all up. You go get chow if you were capable of eating, thinking about, do you want a full stomach of food when you're going out, possibly get shot in the guts. So in my case, I didn't eat much. And it was all red lights, so you wouldn't lose your night vision. And go down the ramp to the pontoon, get your web gear, which you always had set up. Don't buckle it up. Grab your rifle, make sure your canteens are full, and then get on the landing craft. And they had guys there because if you fell between the barge and the landing craft, the river's flowing by. It's a huge river. And they had what they called swimmers, but I never saw anybody fall in. But I always unbuckled because you're going to the bottom with that web gear on.
Yeah, that's a heavy pack.
I carried 8 grenades, 2 canteens of water. You might get 1 can of C-wraps if you could fit it in, because we couldn't carry packs. And my ammo load, basic load, and you got your helmet, and sometimes they'd make you wear a flak vest, which was just hotter than hell wearing a flak vest, and it wouldn't stop a bullet, stop the shrapnel. So that's how that would work. You get into the landing craft, which looked like World War II Normandy, but the back of it was built up with some turrets with machine guns. And you're down in the well deck, just like you'd see in the movies, and then there's a ramp in the front that drops. And they would form up in the river, and this is all in the dark, so the BC couldn't see which way you were going, even though how they know where you're going. And you go out in a line. Usually they'd have a couple gunboats in front, because when you got to a canal, they'd drag these anchors for mines to get the wires for mines and strip them off. And then there'd be a monitor, which had the heavy turrets up to a 40 millimeter, and then us. And they'd have some place you're going to go. And you might not get there, because if you get ambushed, they're all dug in on the beach. They're in bunkers and in holes. You're in this metal contraption, and they shoot B-40 rockets at you, and bullets are bouncing off, and there's firing going on everywhere. And you could fire over the side, stand up and fire, and they'd be looking for where they're going to dump you on the beach. And you just always hope you can get dumped in front of a bunker, and then you get off that thing as fast as you could. Sometimes you get off and immediately be stuck in the muck.
Right, let's talk about the mud there. It's not just normal mud. It's because this is a place that's always wet and muddy, correct?
It's a swamp. You get stuck in the mud to the point guys would have to come over and pull you out. And crossing, sometimes it was like pudding, so it was just so gooey you could walk through it. Might be up to your waist. And that's why grenades and ammo is waterproofed. And but several times I've seen people get stuck, and I'd been stuck. In fact, I went across one canal where I was up to my neck walking across it, and I stepped in a hole and I went underwater. So I'm trying to get my feet moving, because you got enough weight with all the ammo and all you're carrying that you're on the bottom, you aren't going to float. And I was waving my rifle around, and a friend of mine came over and pulled me up, because I couldn't get. Now the choice was I could have dropped everything and gotten out of there, but then I would have lost all my equipment. But it was constant mud and water. Rice paddies are flooded, and your feet, skin starts coming off of them. You didn't wear socks. Some guys tried socks, and then you'd put a pair up in your helmet to dry and have some on, but as soon as you step in water, you're wet. Now you got like a wet towel wrapped around your foot, because combat boots have drain holes in them. And you'd come out of the water and you'd spit the water out. So our time in the field was limited by when you start having your skin coming off, because you can get trench foot.
Wow. And
then you're going to be on light duty, and then you're missing more men. So it was, you had to always watch what the condition.
How did you know about when you needed to not be back in the field with your feet then?
That was up to the medics.
Okay.
And several of us got ringworm pretty bad. It was mainly up to your waist, because your pants were always wet, and everything up to your waist was wet a lot. And that put you on light duty for a couple of days, and they had calamine lotion, which there were certain places you don't want to put calamine lotion on. But,
I can imagine.
Which I won't mention, but you'd have a new guy who'd say, hey, be sure to put some of that down there.
Right.
And, you know, it's like you're on fire then. But
right.
So you get over that. And Mosquitoes are just the terrible thing. They're out at dark. They're huge, and all you can do is put bug dope on, so you have your hands and your face exposed. So you got to get that on your hands and face. And now they're by your ears. It's just buzzing. And you could wake up in the morning, your lips real swollen up, or your eyes closed, as you lick your lips, and now there's no lotion there. When you're asleep in a depression with a guy, those things bite you. I've been bitten right through my fatigues. It's got to be a pretty heavy-duty mosquito to go through fabric.
Right, that is a heavy-duty. Was that the worst kind of, of the natural? I mean, I've heard about snakes, I've heard scorpions, I've heard now also mosquitoes. Were mosquitoes the worst?
Well, to me, they're worse because they irritate you all night. Some people freaked out over the leeches, but
I've heard leeches, yeah.
The leech isn't any problem at all. It doesn't spit back in. It sucks blood, and you don't even know you have a leech on until someone sees it or you see it. And they're easy to remove, and they don't leave really an open wound. Ants down in the Delta, ants pretty much couldn't live in the ground because of the wetness, so they live in a tree. You made a mistake of leaning against a tree and they got on you, you're going to have guys come over and help you and get your shirt off, because they're going to just be biting you. And I mean, you get swarmed by them. So you soon learn that if you're going to lean against something, look at it pretty closely. All you need is those ants on you once. But mosquitoes, yeah, you get malaria, and I got malaria. And they had malaria pills. You didn't always get those. It's sort of like salt tablets. You're supposed to take those quite a bit, but you could only have so many with the medic, and you just didn't get all that stuff.
Right, right.
And I got dysentery, which was another...
That's a mean disease, too.
Another reward of getting into something or getting in your mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, they said some of us had worms when we left there that were in our bowels, but they had determined they weren't going to be any problem, and they'd finally just go away. But that was nice to know.
Yeah, it's a reassuring thought. Like, the worms that are living in you, they'll eventually.
I mean, everybody had to be checked for VD, a blood test, before you left the country. But the combat units, there aren't any bar girls hanging around. And we didn't have any of that on our base anyway. If you snuck into town, I mean, I saw one guy, he wasn't going home with us. He was going to go to the Philippines because he had gotten some kind of ED. They didn't know what it was, and he was in sad shape. You don't go back to America with that, so they give you a blood test.
Wow. What about, so you're out there, what are these, so you land, the front flies open, you get off as quickly as you can, then what?
Then you're in the jungle and you spread out. If it's a firefight, then you're going to be looking for cover where the firing's coming from. But most of the time you're going to get off and there's going to be nothing going on. You're going to get organized, you know, what squad is where, what, and you're going to move to some objective. The canals are pretty heavily vegetated around all the canals, and when you get on the ground in any of these canals, you'd start thinking these Vietnamese have been building bunkers and digging holes for hundreds of years, because every tree line and these canals all had bunkers. Now, the good thing is when you get off and they aren't occupied. Yeah. Now, mostly what you're fighting down in the south, at least then, is Viet Cong, right? Viet Cong, one of the worst battles we were in, or actually thought we were going to get overrun. They have green tracers, we have red tracers, and it was a hot battle. We had lots of dead and wounded. And I was in a position with a guy shot through the groin, and we didn't have any more morphine, and he was miserable and loud. And I thought, we're going to get overrun. And then you have to consider, what will you do? You're going to run out of ammo, and what are you going to do? You're going to let them kill you? You're going to let them capture you, or are you going to kill yourself? rough.
Yeah. And now this is happening pretty quickly, right?
Oh yeah.
Richard? I mean, so you're trying to weigh all these options while you're trying to just hold a position, correct?
Yeah, you know how much ammo you have. You aren't getting any more.
Right.
I mean, if you can move around and get to a dead guy or a wounded guy and get his ammo, that's all right. But in this case, you couldn't move around. The firing was just intense. And before, I'm sure it was a battalion we'd come up on, and that was a big group, and they were dug in. And then they were able to get an artillery barrage, and they dropped artillery just right in front of us and moved it around. The next day, we got the wounded together and had the dead piled up, and we went into their camp. And I remember there was a guy laying there. He'd been, what's the word for it? Eviscerated?
Eviscerated, yeah.
Yeah, and he had a machine gun, and he was definitely not South Vietnamese. He was a big guy. He was North Vietnamese or Chinese, but he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Anytime you have a bomb, if the jets come over and they drop a bomb and you see it tumbling, you can keep your head up and watch, because that's napalm, one of the best things ever invented for a war like that. If that bomb drops down and it's coming down like that, you better get down, because that shrapnel is just tear trees down. I had a big chunk thump right in front of me. And without thinking, I went to move it and just burnt the crap out of my hand.
Wow. Yeah.
But I didn't think, I think thunk. Now, if it thunked back a little further, then I wouldn't be here.
Right. What was so how did you get out of that situation? You think you're going to be overrun, you're running out of ammo, you got a guy wounded. How did that turn out?
The artillery saved it.
Okay.
They put artillery on them, and that's the end of that fight. Even though they were close, we had some of them really close. You can bring the artillery in real close to you.
Right. If it's dense jungle like that, how do you know what you're shooting at? How do you know where they are, and how do you know how do you know, get your sense of place in shooting?
Muzzle flashes and where the tracers are coming from.
Okay.
See, a tracer doesn't start tracing until it's out away from the rifle a ways.
Okay.
That's to keep someone seeing that the tracer started at your rifle. And I mean, that was a big encampment. Now, they hauled away most of their dead, but you can see the blood trails. And if they're in a really good bunker, it takes a direct hit. I mean, they might have concussion and lose their hearing, but those things are made out of mud and logs, and the mud's like concrete, so you need a direct hit. And then you have to go and look through the bunkers, and they left dead behind, but you could imagine how many of them actually did get killed. Yeah. And it was estimated as a battalion, and I never did this body count thing and all that, but they had after action reports, and they'd say there were 316 killed, and they'd do that kind of thing, and I never knew who did that counting or what that was all about. But
right. Well, did you get a sense? So, how often, when you would go out on an ambush or a patrol, how often would you get fire? How often was it constant that you'd find yourself in combat, or was it?
Well, if you got ambushed, then you're in combat.
Yep.
And I never had anybody set off a booby trap or any ambush sprung on us when I was on point, which I was happy about, and then I was paying attention. But when we set up an ambush, if you don't have many people, we were always under strength. If there's two of you in a position, and you have to know where the other positions are, and if you can get resupplied, at the end of the day, you get resupplied with helicopters. You get sea rations, water, ammo. So you might eat some sea rations right then, and then as it gets dark, you move the whole position somewhere else, and where you were then gets mortared. because that tells you someone's out there watching you. Now they don't know where you are because you moved in the dark. So you set up, if you have a 3-man position, you're just going to get more sleep. A 2-man position, you're going to, half the night you're awake. And you got to make sure when you wake up the next guy that he's awake. Some people aren't good waking up. You have to make sure they're awake. And when they're moving around and they assure you, that's when you can lay down. And if it's a 3-man position, you'll lay down next to somebody because you're freezing your ass off.
Right.
And I remember waking up one morning and I was just so rested. I didn't know what was going on. I just felt so good. And this guy's asleep. He'd been asleep all night. Now wasn't a laughing matter.
Yeah.
So you'd have any number of people might do that, especially when they're new. So you took any of them that did that, the next night you put them out on a listening post out in front of the company with a radio. And like the sergeant said, now let's see which one of you guys wants to sleep.
Yeah.
Get over it real quick. Those people you're with, you're so close with, you trusting them, they trust you. I mean, you can't get any tighter with people than when you're in combat. And you got to watch the new guys, and if you don't help them, they get you killed. But you got to watch the grenade has a cotter key through it and a ring that you stick your finger in and you pull the pin out. Well, you bend that cotter key all the way around. When you want to get that pin out, you're going to get it out. But some of them would just have it slightly bent over because they're afraid they couldn't pull the pin, and that thing gets stuck on some brush and the pin comes out. So you had to check their equipment, see what they're doing. This is after I got some rank.
Yeah.
It's up to someone else when you're lower rank, because I was an E1 when I left the United States. They had to make me an E2 when I got there because you couldn't have an E1 in Vietnam, the way I understood it. Then I went to E3, E4, which was a specialist. Then I was sent up to Bearcat, a big base camp up north, for non-commissioner officers training to be an E5. So I was a sergeant E5. And that made me a platoon sergeant. And at one time I was a platoon leader. But, you know, you always felt funny if you didn't have your rifle with you. You never set it down where you can't reach it. You don't walk away from your rifle because, as they would say, if the S hits the fan and you go to the ground, you better have that rifle with you. I mean, and you had to make sure people understood. You didn't walk away and leave your rifle over there. What the hell's wrong with you?
Right. Right. So some of it was training in the new guy, right? I mean,
yeah, you had to just make sure they didn't. I mean, people don't normally walk around with grenades, and back in the States, they'll have these pits. You go in the pit, and there's a guy in there with you, and you pull the pin and throw the grenade. Well, people have been known to drop the damn thing with this sergeant and you in the pit, and the guy has to reach down and get it real quick and throw it out, and that's why he's in with you. So you've thrown a few grenades, but now you got grenades hanging on your web gear, and you want to make sure those pins are bent over. It's stuff like that. And how are they carrying their ammo? Is your canteen full? Because you can't drink enough water when you first get there. And then after you're there a while, you need a lot less water. You don't sweat like you did before.
Yeah.
Acclimated.
Yeah. What was the morale or camaraderie within your platoon, within your group over there? Was it pretty good? I mean, you mentioned when you came in, it was like breaking into a club where everybody knew each other. That seems like it might be kind of hard. What was the camaraderie like?
Well, in the beginning, it was hard because those guys all trained together, knew each other, and they all on first name basis. I mean, everything after that becomes last names. You don't use first names. But after you're there a while, it's just like any other job, you know. Show me what you do here, and in a couple of months, maybe I can do what you do. So it's all training. you
all
get
on the job.
On the job training, and if you're listening and paying attention, you're going to probably be all right. Now anybody can catch a bullet just by chance. When I had that mortar round go off, it was about 10 feet from my head, and I just had the B-40 rocket injure me on the boat. I completely lost my hearing from the concussion, and I could see people's lips moving. That was scary. I mean, I was deaf, and I'm going, how long is this going to last? This is no good. I'm following people, and I can't hear anything.
Yeah.
So my senses were screwed up, and it started coming back. But yeah, that was a little bit scary. I mean, I had bullet hit a wall during TET. It was right in front of me. It'd been up a little higher, it would have hit me. It's just random. There was one guy from Chicago out with us, and he was one of the old original guys, and he's the only one that ever brushed his teeth out in the field because you wanted to drink that water, and nobody brushed their teeth. So he'd be brushing his teeth, and right after I got wounded, he caught a piece of shrapnel, which was lucky for him, square in the mouth. So he had 4 lips and no teeth, and the teeth stopped this piece of shrapnel. And here's the only guy that ever brushed his teeth. Now he had no teeth.
Wow.
And that's what I mean. It's all random. I mean, you can get yourself killed. One guy got a Dear John letter, which is just brutal that anybody would send a letter to a guy over there and say his wife, I've started seeing another person, I'm going to want a divorce. And he sat up during a battle and he was killed. He just sat up.
Wow.
It's really sad.
What was the, so you were going out, how often would you go out on these boats would you do it for so many days on, so many days off, every other day? Give me a sense of how often you'd hop on these boats to go up the river to be dropped off somewhere for a...
Well, it was, you never knew what the planning was going on, and you're also always a ready reaction force.
Okay.
So back in the base camp, even if you could get some beer, get your hands on some beer, you don't want to get drunk.
Right.
Because it could be saddle up, we're going out, such and such units in full contact. So on the boat, it was also, we had ready reaction like that, so you never knew when that might happen. But I'd say it was just every so many days.
Okay.
You didn't spend a lot of time on those boats.
Okay.
And they did have an LST out there, and it had refrigeration. That's where they'd take the bodies.
Sure.
And they'd bring movies over. I mean, the Navy guys are watching movies.
Right.
They got popcorn and ice cream. So
right.
That's why you want to go in the Navy or the Air Force.
Right. What was the, and then when you'd go back to base camp, let's talk a little bit about the base camp at Dong Tam, because you showed me an initial picture, and that looks pretty primitive. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, the first places to stay were all tents with sandbags around them. The sandbags were probably about waist high, and they had cots in them, and smelled just like the Army. I mean, that stuff must have been just like the sea rations or stuff they could still that were used in Korea. You never knew what was going to happen to base camp. You couldn't go too far away from the company compound. There was nowhere to go anyway.
Right, you're out in the middle of a field.
Yeah, it's the rice paddy. All dirt and sand, so in the dry season, if a truck came by, it's all dust. Everything's covered with dust. And whether you're on the ships or, see, you aren't supposed to call them boats. I'm trying to be nice to any Navy guy reading this. Okay. You got to call them ships. Okay. I always call them boats, but I found out what. You always clean your rifle. That's your first thing. Before you clean yourself, you clean your rifle. Because you could be going out again in 3 minutes. You don't want to leave that thing all mucked up. And I kept my original rifle back in Dong Tam or wherever for my whole tour, which was the old flash suppressor had the 3-prong flash suppressor. The new rifles had a barrel flash suppressor. Mine worked, it functioned, I kept it. But they put a swimming pool in Dong Tam. It was a bladder up in the air, so every time we got rocketed, it had water squirting out all over the place. And they'd patch that up. And the only thing we did with the swimming pool is they wanted us to get in it with all of our gear on to see how you could stay afloat and all. That's the only time we were around that swimming pool. And there were guys that couldn't swim at all. I mean, I pulled a guy out of canal that almost drowned me. He was frantic. He couldn't swim. And we didn't have ropes all the time, the rope across.
Right.
Sometimes we'd take sand pans if they're available.
Right.
A bunch of GIs in a sand pan. Sometimes you walk across on a log bridge, it's one log wide. You better have some sense of balance. But in the base camp, you operated almost always with helicopters out of the base camp and be inserted somewhere. And sometimes if it was rice paddies, they can't land where there's trees around, so they might just hover.
Okay.
And when I get stuck in the mud, and you'd jump out and get stuck in the mud.
Right.
But, you know, the helicopter guys, that was your bus. And there's an M60 machine gun on each side. The thing's made out of aluminum. The pilots have flak jackets all stuffed underneath their seats. I think they had a steel seat. And the flak jackets up front where there's plexiglass so they could see where they're landing. They just stuffed the thing with flak jackets. And aluminum doesn't stop bullets, but you'd sit in there sit on the edge of the door with your legs hanging out, and it was all right. If the thing made a maneuver, it's like a bucket with water in it. It just glued you down to where you're sitting. But sometimes we took trucks out of Dong Tam, and then we did perimeter, little scout around the perimeter. It was all booby traps, dangerous place to go. Then you might draw perimeter duty where they'd have us manning the perimeter.
Okay. What was that like?
Well, not very much ever happened on the perimeter. Usually it was just rockets at night or mortars.
What was that like?
Well,
rockets and mortars, I mean, they're obviously doing it because you're trying to sleep. That would probably be pretty disruptive, right?
Well, yeah, you can't sleep but when I left at the end of my tour, they had built 2-story barracks out of wood, and they had tin roof. So if the first one doesn't get you, you run like hell. I'd jump off the landing. It was down the steps, a landing, then the other steps with a 2-story. I'd just jump right off the landing, and you try to get in the bunker.
Okay.
It's just indiscriminate. Once I was trying to get out the door of the damn thing, and the rockets were hitting outside the door, so I went to the back of the building and it pulled a couple of mattresses over me until it stopped. And I'll never forget it. When I went out that door, there was a camp dog there licking up a puddle of blood. Somebody had run out that door at the wrong time.
Yeah.
But it was dirty, noisy, but you know, you weren't getting out of a landing craft.
Right. Were you ever? Did you ever get good sleep in Vietnam, or how does that work? It sounds like if you're out, you're on guard duty, or you're listening, or at night you're getting mortared. It sounds like a pretty hard place to get any, and pretty physically exerting too. Yeah,
I've had my heart pounding where I thought, it shows my heart's working good, because the exertion was really something, especially if you got a colonel in a loach flying around and he calls down and says, move 2,000 meters to your right. And he's not down here seeing what you're moving through.
Right.
But sleep, I still sleep generally 6 hours a night. I wake up sometimes at the slightest noise and I'm wide awake. I mean, this has been 47 years. What the hell is this all about?
Right.
And my heart will be pounding, and I listen, and I don't hear anything else. Yeah, you don't get much sleep. You just get used to it. What are you going to do?
Right, right. Let's talk a little bit about, you saw something very interesting. You were there during the Tet Offensive.
Yes.
And the Tet Offensive was bad in all parts, but was particularly pronounced in the south part of Vietnam. What was it like for you?
I think it was particularly bad up in north with the Marines, because they had a major city they had to go in, and it was really packed with the North Vietnamese. Of course, you don't know it's Tet. You know there's a holiday, so nothing's going to happen. So they put.
So that's what you were thinking.
Oh yeah, they never violated the holiday before.
Okay.
So we'd been taken out on choppers to this open area by a canal, and I guess the idea was for us to watch the canal. And we actually were filling sandbags and digging some positions because we were supposed to be there a while. Well, the word came down, we have to move, there's something going on, you're going to be picked up, throw everything you can't carry in the canal. So that included mines, and I mean, a lot of stuff went in the canal. What are you going to do?
Right.
Hopefully no one's watching you, so they go get the stuff.
Right.
So picked us up with choppers, and we're going, what's going on? No one knows. Of course, the guys in the chopper don't know. There's a guy on each side of you with an M60 and the two guys up front flying. Took us in Dong Tam, said, make sure you got water and ammunition. We're going into Mito. It's under attack. Well, it still wasn't talking about Tet, was just a word. Took us in the choppers, landed on the road going into Mito, and let us out. And it was nighttime, and we just started walking into this town we'd never been in. We'd driven through it before, but you weren't allowed in it. And I think the first thing I saw that was really nasty was they had overrun the ARVN, Army of Vietnam, and they had APCs. And there's a 50 caliber mounted on the top of the APC, and it's made out of 2 inches of aluminum. And we went up on the second floor of a building, and they had a house people had left. Mm-hmm. And in the house, they had some alcoholic drinks, and we opened them and put rags in them and went up on the roof, because you can always throw a Molotov cocktail on top of an APC. That'll give you some discouragement. Mm-hmm. So we were set up for that. We didn't have any law rockets. No recoilless rifles, nothing to deal with an armored vehicle. So that's kind of disconcerting. And we'd also run out of food and water because they hadn't resupplied us. This was 2 days without resupply. So in comes this funny looking thing. It turned out to be a Cobra gunship. Never seen a Cobra gunship. The guys sit behind each other. They're real narrow. And they just flattened those APCs. They hit them with a rocket, and all 4 sides came down, and the top flew off. And I was thinking then, I'm glad I'm not driving one of those damn things. And when they took us in APCs, you never sat inside. That's where the troops sit because of mines. You always sat on the top. Your chance of, if you hit a mine, you get thrown off, you might break something, but you won't be dead. So here's an armored personnel carrier that carries everybody on the top, and it was never designed to be on top of it. You hanging on for your life with some guy driving the thing that's probably 18 years old going like hell.
Right, trying not to slow down. What's the, so you did that, what happened? Because Tet wasn't just one day, it was kind of a whole thing. Tell me about your involvement in Tet, then what happens?
Well, we fought building to building, and I was on point. And we went into one building, these grenades started going off. And we're trying to figure out, where are they coming from? And I heard some noise up on the roof. So I shot up through that tin roof with my M16. And a little while later, another grenade went off. And it kind of came to me that someone's up there. And I certainly didn't kill him. So I went out through a window on the roof around the corner, and here was a guy dressed like an ARVN, which just means he had fatigues on. He wasn't, you know, the black pajama guys. And I just grabbed him. I should have killed him, but this is looking way back, because as far as I'm concerned, he went to the ARVNs and they just released him. But he had to be one trying to drop grenades on him, and I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and put, God, it was crazy, put my Puma hunting knife against his throat and dragged him back in, because you couldn't get a bayonet in Vietnam. The SKS rifles the enemy had spiked bayonets on them. You couldn't get a 30-round magazine. They had 30-round magazines. And I sent a letter to Colt Firearms, see if I could buy some 30-round magazines. They sent back, said I had to get it through supply. And you kept 18 rounds in your 20-round magazine.
Because they jam, right?
You could jam, so just knowing that, and then you hit it on your helmet to get all the bullets seated to the back of the magazine before you stick it in. Well, that went on, and it seemed like it went on and on, but we were clearing anything you saw out in front of you was enemy, so you just killed it. And there's regular gas stations there, and it was like a regular little city. But we got a lot of fire from an ARVN compound one day, and I just got behind a tombstone and wanted to get something to eat. And I don't know how to shut this thing off, but it'll go away. And I'll never forget this. Some of this stuff, how could it be this clear to you? But I sat with my back to the tombstone on the grave because all the firing was that way, and I opened a can of sea rats. And you always kept your P38 can opener on your dog tags, because you don't have that, you're going to have to use a knife. And I was just kind of relaxed. It was sunny, and you know, there's all kinds of firing going, but I was safe. And I watched this line of ants, and it went up a wall, and here was a chunk of a guy plastered to the wall. Wow. I'm going, okay, well, they're after some meat. And I can still see that, but you know, who was it? Probably, oh, by then they had started using artillery in Mito, which was off limits to artillery. You don't want to hurt the buildings, but when they saw we were all getting killed, they brought in artillery, and that guy had probably been in the wrong place, got splattered.
Yeah. What about also, you know, the interesting thing about that story is you're sitting there and there's firing going on, and you have to eat, I know, and you're hungry, but it's also probably a pretty bizarre situation. Ants are eating, you know, human flesh. The people are firing, and you're having lunch or dinner or probably lunch. Well, it's an odd situation, isn't it?
No, it seemed like a good place to be. A tombstone to my back.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
not gonna.
And and this was coming from an ARVN compound, so I didn't know if they mistaked us. I didn't have the greatest thoughts about the ARVN army anyway, but. Right. Are they going to realize they're shooting at us and we're shooting at them, or has that place been taken over by the VC? Who knows? Meanwhile, I was hungry, so I opened a can of sea rats.
Mm-hmm. What when you're down there, what is your opinion of the fighting, since you had to fight against the Viet Cong? What is your opinion of how the Viet Cong fought?
They were very good at ambushes, okay. And they did have radios. You just had to kill him.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got wounded and I was on the boats, and the landing craft got hit with a B-40 rocket right where this Navy guy was standing with the .30 caliber. And I just turned around. I'd gone up to talk to the captain and the lieutenant and the captain's radio man. He had a forward observer. And they were right across from the guy that caught the B-40. And I just turned around, so I just got it in the head and the neck and the back. And I think we had 27 out of 29 of us wounded on that thing. And my friend Wayne Takahata, he took a piece right across his major arteries here and all of his tendons. And I was trying to clamp down on that. He's bleeding all over the place. And got out a bandage and had him holding it, and they dropped the ramp, and the people who could get off got off, and the guy yelled down at me, he says, "You got to either get off now or stay on." You got to stay or get off, because we're backing out of here. And so I ran off. And I didn't know at that time, but my platoon lieutenant had to be pretty badly wounded. He was evacuated, but he wasn't on the beach. And we were immediately pinned down by a machine gun. And we had brought some of the weapons platoon guys out with us who we never took out with us. They're supposed to stay back. They'd fire mortars and flares for us at night. And they brought the recoilless rifle. And you couldn't carry that in the field usually because the ammo and that thing are too heavy and you just get stuck in the muck. But because they had that thing, they set it up and fired a flechette round at where the machine gun fire was coming from, which is nothing but nails with fins on them. It's exactly what they look like. They're just packed in there. They fired that, it was the end of the machine gun. And when I went up there, there was blood trails from that place, and the machine gun wasn't there. But I had some of the guys fire up into the coconut trees because I thought we're getting bullets in from somewhere. And, you know, or is someone into trees? So I had them blast the trees around us.
Wow.
And you never remember, I don't ever remember how many guys were wounded or killed. I remember dragging a dead guy out of there, and the mud was up to my calves, and it was just hard to pull them. But we never left our people.
Yeah. Was it hard seeing other guys? I mean, you talked about a guy getting hit in the groin and being in pain. That's got to be hard to keep concentrated, I would imagine, on the task at hand, and just hard to see, because these are people that you got up that morning, maybe had chow with or have been with for a while, right?
Well, you're scared to death, but you have to overcome it. I've seen people cower, just, I don't know, their just mind went out. I mean, I've seen people refuse to go out. We're going out in the morning, we're going up to the Snoopy's nose, which is a canal that looked like Snoopy's nose where we always got ambushed. And I've seen guys refuse to go out.
What happened? What happened to them? What happened?
Well, it wasn't the kind of thing where you had firing squads, but they had me take that particular guy in a little motorboat over to the LST to deliver him to the brink. And they said, here, take this 45 and take him over to the LST. We're out in the middle of the Mekong River. What's he going to do, jump me?
Right.
Is he going to jump out of the boat? No.
Right.
And I didn't really have good instructions, but I suppose if he was tried to do anything, I was supposed to kill him. But who's going to jump out of the boat or do much? Anyway.
Yeah.
And the guys that would just freak out, you just yell at them, start firing, because fire suppression keeps them off of you. If there's just a little bit of firing, there's a bunch of them, they're going to just keep on moving in until they overrun it.
Yeah.
And we had one black first sergeant went out with us, and he was from the States, and the mosquitoes drove him so nuts that he started screaming and babbling. He lost his mind, and you couldn't shut him up, and you don't talk out there. And they had to call in a helicopter to take him out. I never saw him again. But obviously having bugs crawling all over you freaked him. Everybody has their tolerance for fear.
Right.
You overcome fear, or you're just going to go nuts.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you were at a breaking point?
I've never felt as much fear as I do now sitting in front of you.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
No, that's, I can understand that, though.
Yeah, it makes, talking about this has always made me nervous, and I don't talk about it very much.
Sure.
But to do this interview, you had to, you know, dredge up everything and look back in the book. So that was on this date, and this is, I mean, I didn't remember when I got the Purple Heart or the Silver Star or the Bronze Star without looking at them.
Yeah.
But the worst was when I thought we were going to get overrun. And are you going to let them kill you, capture you, or are you going to kill yourself?
What did you decide?
Kill myself.
Okay.
God, I hope there's no Catholic priest watching it. I'm not Catholic, but...
Right. But those are the kind of things that you have to decide.
I mean, what would you do?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I've sat there. I don't know what I would do. I'd probably let them. I'd probably let them kill me.
Well, that might not be very pleasant.
Yeah, no, I don't like any of the options. That's why yeah, no.
Yeah, I knew you couldn't get through there without getting wounded. I'd figured that out after 6 months. There's no way you're getting out of here. We were losing about 200 guys a day over there. I think that was the whole country.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, one guy came back. They sent you back if you could still move around and all. They sent Takahata back, and his wrist still didn't work right. And after they fixed that cut across his, and one guy, he was crawling along and he took a bullet through his buttocks and out the other side because he obviously had his ass too high. And the way they fixed him to get to that wound, which goes through a lot of muscle, they just slit it open until they got down to the wound channel, cleaned it out, then sewed them back together. And that was one ugly looking scar.
I imagine so. It seemed like they just needed people, so they'd send them right back then.
Oh yeah, we were always short of people. See, there's approximately 7 rear echelon people for every combat guy. So you go back to the base camp, you got guys driving trucks, guys delivering fuel, guys unloading, loading stuff, and guys cooking steaks and drinking beer. And you come walking back in, and you're smelly, and I mean, your uniform would turn white from the sweat.
Yeah.
And you just throw all that stuff into the laundry. You'd mark your initials on it with paint, and they put it in something that stunk like, it wasn't like laundry in the States, and they'd bring all that back, and you dig through there and look for a short small, because I need a short small. I can't do some tall guy's shirt and have sleeves hanging down past my.
Yeah.
But the rear echelon guys, you know, they're in the base camp all the time. The only thing they got to fear is a rocket hitting you. And our first sergeant, who was World War II in Korea, a rocket landed right on the supply hut and killed him. I mean, what are the chances?
Yeah. Yeah, he makes it through both of that. And
that's the way it is. It's all random.
Was it, let's talk about how you were injured. You got a Silver Star, a Bronze Star with V, which is combat, and then also a Purple Heart. Let's talk about how that Silver Star, because I read the commendation on that. How did that happen? Tell me about that.
Well, the Silver Star was when the rocket hit the landing craft, and I got wounded at the same time. And I think most of the headquarters guys, I mean, I can't remember seeing the captain ever got off the boat, and I know the lieutenant didn't, and I imagine the captain's radio man and the forward observer didn't, but commendation said I then became the platoon leader. Well, it goes by rank, and there wasn't anybody outranking me, but I wasn't trying to be, hey, I'm now the platoon leader. Look, right. I'm the leader, everybody watch me. No, you do your thing. And someone has to see this stuff happen to make this an accommodation. You don't know about it. And then suddenly back in the base camp, you're getting a Silver Star and the colonel's flying in, and you're getting a Bronze Star, and you all have to line up here. I mean, I was the only guy that didn't have his boots polished because I went to get a beer. Because I was just, you know, younger guys were polishing their combat boots. But anyway, so you get it and you go, well, you know, that's nice. I didn't even know what the Silver Star was. I think it's third from the top. But at that time, it was an award, and they had an award ceremony, and it's in the little newspaper. Mm-hmm. You can see my dumbass standing there in a line with his boots not polished, getting a medal pinned on him.
Right.
It's, yeah, that was a nasty battle. I think it went on for 4 days. That was a pretty heavy unit we ran into there. And that wasn't the time the Navy almost killed me. It was another time. See, when you carry grenades, you better carry at least 2 smoke grenades. You got concussion, fragmentation, and smoke. And I was in a ditch at the canal, and that was another ambush. And the Navy's shooting at the beach. They're supposed to know where we are on the beach, and they're shooting at both sides of the canal. The enemy's shooting at us from down the canal ways and from behind us inland. and I jumped into a ditch, and it was half full of water. And the Navy started cranking off automatic grenade rounds, and they're coming right in the ditch, just progressing down toward me. And I realized they don't know where we are, and I popped a smoke grenade, put it on my helmet, which I had slightly stuck out of this ditch, and they stopped. It's a good thing I had smoke grenades, because, you know, there's another time.
Yeah. All these things are very, they have to be disturbing, because you dodge all of these
Disturbing?
almost. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I'm open to other words, but I mean, in every case that you mentioned, it's somewhat random and almost by luck.
That's what it is. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you die.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be stupid
Right,
and get yourself killed, but you can be as cautious. You could be Audie Murphy and still get in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. What about when you so you took frag and the so you were wounded there in the neck and in the shoulder. Is that where it hit you?
Because I just turned around, so it got me in the head, the neck, and shoulder and back area. Shrapnel.
Yeah. So you'd had shrapnel, dysentery, you'd had, and also malaria. That's a pretty tough year by anybody's standard.
Well, you can't, you know, I don't know how I got dysentery. You'd run out of water, and if you're around a village, they'd have these big crocks of water, and they'd usually have some fish swimming around in them to eat the mosquito larvae that are going to propagate in their water. Mm-hmm. But that was their drinking water. Well, they got malaria too, and other diseases. But you go, well, I'm pretty thirsty, but I'm not that thirsty. You know,
right.
So I must have gotten dysentery from being in foul water. You know, that's all I could figure. But we were on the ships, and I was real sick back in the berthing area, and some guys helped me to the Navy doctor, and he had a corpsman. And the Navy doctor looked me over and says, yeah, you got malaria, and you got another problem. And he prescribed something, and the corpsman, I was sitting in there with the corpsman, he says, you know what, I'm just going to give you all three things with one shot. And it's like, oh my God, how big is this going to be?
Right.
So he shot me up. I made it back to the berthing area, and I cramped up double in the prenatal position. I couldn't move, and these guys had to carry me back. And the Army doctor came in, and I remember I was laying there going, I'm not feeling very good, and the Army doctor's arguing with the Navy doctor. I'm going, oh my God, what have they done to me?
Right.
That's why I'm nervous when I see white coats. But see, you don't go to at the base camp or a surgery on one of those ships, you don't go there when you have shrapnel. You don't, those are for people who are losing a leg, have bullets in them. You just don't do that. Shrapnel's going to come out of you. It would come out of me in my bunk. You'd find it. It's like splinters, and it would work its way out. It'd fester and work out. But it's not going to kill you. So, and you don't want to be going, it's like there's people in there with bullet holes in them and parts of them missing. You go in and say, hey, I got a toothache. How stupid would you feel about that?
Yeah.
I would have felt stupid, so.
Yeah.
So I never got x-rayed or anything. I'm sure it's all out of me.
Right. What's when you're out there and for 4 days, you were part of that battle for 4 days. How do you survive kind of holding off people, and how does it end? How do you get out of that?
Well, it slows down. They'll finally retreat after we've called in everything we can to kill them. I mean, if you could get the jets from up north to come down, they were great. They drop that napalm. I don't care if you're in a bunker or not. That's the end of you. And drop high explosive, and then the artillery. You're never supposed to move out of the range of your artillery. So for the mobile riverine force, they had 105 howitzers mounted on these like rafts, and they'd bring the artillery with them so we wouldn't get out of range of artillery. Because artillery can save you and also kill you, but if you get short rounds,
Yep.
Some guy came in a helicopter when we had artillery walking in front of us, and one of the rounds hit that chopper. What's the chance? But see, you'd never come down during an artillery strike to that level. And we spent half a day out there looking for the rotor blade they wanted off of that chopper. And both the guys were, it's like it broke every bone in their body. There's like a bean bag.
Yeah.
When we hauled them out, they were so busted up.
Wow.
But they died instantly, which is better than suffering. But I mean, those are, you know, you could get killed by friendly fire. You could get killed just by being back in the base camp and having one of the rockets come through the roof where you were sleeping.
Did you ever get a sense from your lieutenants or from the leaders of what your job there was to do or what you were doing? I mean, what were you a part of?
Well, when I was on point, I always knew what I was doing. And I didn't mention the lieutenants yet, have I?
No, you haven't. You can talk about that.
I always said there's 3 things that get you killed or wounded in Vietnam. One was the enemy with all of his weapons. Number 2 was booby traps. And number 3 were green second lieutenants. Some of them came in and they thought they knew all about it when they didn't. And others, I mean, they were good and they're bad, and some of them were terrible. And one tried to get me wounded or killed twice, and I just refused. I worked with a Chu Hoi, that was the program so the enemy could come over to the American side. And they had to be vetted somehow. I don't know how it worked, but this guy had worked with the 514th VC Battalion for 7 years. And he'd gone Chu Hoi, and they paid him $55 a month. Obviously, this is where he lived, and this is probably where he grew up, and he knew everything, and he spoke the language. So I got tight with him right away. He told me he could speak some broken English. He wanted a 45. I made sure I got him a 45. That guy was golden to be with. But this lieutenant, who was very aggressive at doing things, he wanted me to go through an area outside an Arvin compound. Well, they always booby trap around their compound because they don't want anyone sneaking up on them at night. So I said something to Ba. He talked to a woman in a hooch and said, "Tangel, don't go in there. It's booby traps." So I said, "I'm not going in there." And he sent in another guy. That guy heard the explosion. Then the medic went in to get that guy, another explosion. So we lost 2 people through his dumbass not listening to people and knowing it all. And God, I was having some bad thoughts about that guy. Once I locked and loaded the M16 when we left the base camp. He said, "What are you doing that for?" I said, "When you leave this camp, you make sure there's a round in the chamber." "Well, I don't think you ought to do that." It's like, geez.
Wow.
And then they sent a strobe light over. I'd never seen a strobe light. And they said, these could be maybe used when you're trying to communicate with another unit. And he gave me a strobe light. It was dark, and he said, "There's another unit out there, and we need to know where they are, and they need to know where we are. So take the strobe light out and hold it up so they can see where we are." Well, I knew that was nuts. So I took my radio man, and I went out with the strobe light, and I turned the damn thing on and put it on top of a dike and told him, "Let's get out of here, away from this." And sure enough, a mortar came right in and got my radio man. So there's 3 things against him right away. He was really belligerent. And then he disappeared. I figured they rotated him because, I mean, he's getting people wounded. He's going to get people killed. I'd seen a second lieutenant have the wrong coordinates and getting ready to call in artillery, and where he's going to call it in is where we were. And the sergeant stopped that. I mean...
Yeah, just not good.
And
10 of them in a year, right?
I went through 10 in a year. See, officers stay in the field for 6 months. So if they came from somewhere else and they were in their last 3 months, they might not be there a while. They were killed, wounded, or rotated. When I went to get my Purple Heart, because they were doing a hearing test on me up at Benoit, or maybe it was Bearcat, I don't even remember. And we went up, we had a guy driving a little truck taking us up. The MPs pulled us over because he didn't have his hat on. He didn't have his head cover on. And I was thinking, this is just great. What are you going to do, give him a ticket to MPs? So we went up there, and he said, when you're up there, you can pick up your Purple Heart certificate. So I got this hearing test. This guy was late to go to lunch. And he said, well, I'm supposed to go to lunch. And I said, I don't know. They told me to come in here for a hearing test. Okay, sit down. Put these on. Beep, 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 beep. And that was it. It was over. In other words, he didn't give me a hearing test because I had lost, I still have a lack of hearing on the left side. But anyway, so I go, well, okay, this is bullshit.
Right.
So I went to get my Purple Heart, which was kind of funny. And here was this second lieutenant who I'd had, and he'd been wounded, and now he's in charge of all these guys with typewriters, just typing away. And he goes back, and this guy typed it up, and he gave it to me, and they give it to you in a nice little 9th Division plastic holder. And it's actually got, you know, the regular Purple Heart and color on it. And I said, does it matter if my name's spelled wrong? Because I was serious. Does that matter? And he, God damn it. God, he jumped up that guy. He jumped on that guy. He says, all you do is type here, and you can't even do that right. This guy's been in combat, and he just, it's like embarrassing. But they worked for him. He typed another one up, and he spelled my name right. It's Tangel, not L-E, but
right.
I mean, you have those humorous things.
Right. Were there happy moments in Vietnam?
When you're happy moments. You mean like where you...
Was there anything, was it ever enjoyable or pleasant in a year?
Well, I enjoyed the sunsets during monsoon season because you got great sunsets and there are flowers growing. And if you aren't, sometimes you're in an area there's going to be no combat because you're near a village and everybody's there. If they all are leaving, it's not good.
Right.
And those were kind of enjoyed. I always liked the outdoors. We had a woman cook us a chicken once. Ba, the Chiu Hoi, the scout, he negotiated a chicken from her, and we paid her with sea rations. But when she cooked it up in the wok, it was good, but the head and the feet were all in there because they don't waste anything. And that was a little strange, but here's some humor.
Right, absolutely. Did you get much interaction with the people in Vietnam, the actual people, or were you?
No, you'd wave to them and smile at them. You'd give kids candy if you had it. But if they're all around, nothing's going to happen. So, you know, that's good. If they all leave.
That's bad.
I mean, we'd left a little area of hooches when everybody was friendly, and we got about 400 yards away, and someone opened up on us from back of the village.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're civilians. They look like civilians here. It's like terrorists. They look like you and me, but then they got a weapon or a suicide vest.
Yeah.
I mean, they look like farmers. You don't kill everybody. At night's curfew. Anybody moving at night, you kill them. And when that machine gunner on a ambush, he had a new guy with him, and he set the new guy up on the machine gun, and it's on the trail along the canal. And I was back by this little hill. It used to be a bunker. And I heard, "Halt!" It's like, Jesus, who's yelling halt? And then the machine gun opens up. There's a squad of VC coming down the canal. You don't yell, "Halt." You kill them.
Yeah.
They splattered. Some jumped in the canal. Some jumped over in front of us, and we threw grenades. And one guy laid out there most of the night moaning, but you don't go out to see how he's doing. And you don't fire your rifle. If you can throw a grenade, it shows where you are. So, oh, and no one smoked at night. I don't mean pot.
Right, cigarette.
Our guys didn't smoke pot. You're going to be out in combat with a guy that smokes pot? I don't think so. You aren't going to be with him. He isn't right.
Right.
No one did that. They do it in the movies. But if you wanted to smoke, I always gave my cigarettes to guys that like to smoke. You could smoke all day, but at night they feel like they need a cigarette. They'd have to put a poncho over them and light it up and smoke it in the poncho because you can see a cigarette from way off. And we just never had. If you ever watch that movie Platoon, it's an old movie. I think Berenger was in it and DeVoe actors. It was very well done in the jungle scenes, especially when they sprung an ambush and the mosquitoes and the rain dripping off of them and the enemy coming through the half light toward you. Those were well done. The rest of it with their partying and smoking and joking. I don't know where they came up with that idea.
Right, right. What was that? So let's talk about when that year's up. Where you get orders to leave Vietnam. What's that like?
Let me see. Before you jump ahead,
all right.
If there was anything here I thought I might want to mention. See, I wrote out a script because I thought you're like a movie a movie producer, and I was going to be in a movie, so I wrote up this script for myself. December. I did it by months. I had 3 pages of script.
That's okay, you can read it.
And I think I've pretty much gone through everything. I didn't mention Lieutenant Fitzgibbons getting killed, did I?
No, you didn't. You want to tell me
I wanted
about
to
that?
mention. He was a new second lieutenant, and I had a talk with him when he first got there, and he said this was his chance to save his life and show his family. He needed to do well here. I mean, that was his deal. And we had a couple of times we went out with him, and he was willing to listen and watch. And I got a 3-day R&R, in-country R&R, which was going to be up at Vong Tau, and you felt naked because you couldn't take your rifle. But while I was gone, he wore his insignia out in the field. And a guy jumped out of a hole and shot him right through the head. And I would have never let that happen. Never in the world. And I always, it's sort of like I almost feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
He would have been alive if I was there, and I wasn't there. And I was underimpressed that someone else didn't notice that. He never saluted an officer.
Right. And you never wore anything that would.
You don't wear your rank, and in fact, you don't say "sir" out in the field unless you say it quietly. But you got to figure the officer's going to have a radio man with him, so he's already a target.
Right.
But yeah, that was a sad occurrence. We pretty much have gone over a lot of things.
Let me ask you a question, because you said something before we turned on the cameras. You said that when you received your Purple Heart, you didn't send it back because of your mother. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't send any of those awards back to my parents.
Why?
Well, you read the thing. What would
Yeah.
what would a mother think?
Yeah, it talks about you being in battle, but it also talks about serving heroically.
Yeah, but it also talks about being wounded and refusing evacuation, and you know, it's not something your mother needs to know. And the Purple Heart itself means you've been wounded, and then they're going to wonder, where did you get shot, you know? So why put them through that? I just didn't send them back.
So did they, did they learn about him eventually?
Yeah, once I was back, because you couldn't leave Oakland. I flew into Oakland when I left Vietnam, and you couldn't leave Oakland until you had all new uniform. Your other one you didn't have anyway, and you threw your combat boots in a big pile, a huge pile of boots. They didn't want you wearing combat boots back in the world. And there are all these women there sewing, and they fit you for a whole new jacket, and anything you have, any award, any insignia has to be on there, right, the 9th Infantry Division, anything that's supposed to be on there. And then you're released. You got new shoes, pants. And they had those race riots going on in Oakland. I don't know what that was about, but I missed the cabs were a screw up, so I missed my flight anyway. And I always remember it was maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd missed my flight. So I went to the bar, and some guy bought me a beer because I was in uniform. And there was a guy that obviously wasn't a hippie. And that was a nice gesture. Yeah. You know, the waitress just pointed at that guy and said, thank you. But, you know, it was a hostile environment coming back in the United States from Vietnam at that time.
What was it like for you? What was your return like?
Well, my brother was working for General Motors Defense down in Santa Barbara. So my flight went to Santa Barbara before I was going to go back to my parents. And those guys at General Motor Defense wanted me to come into their theater and watch this machine gun they were working on that had, it was beltless and no cartridge case. Each round would just consume itself. The bullet would fly out, and there'd be none of these links flying out the other side of it. You know, and you're nervous as hell. You're in a whole new, you're back in America. Yeah. So I sat in this theater by myself, and I ran this movie, and I wanted to know what I thought about it. And I couldn't think up any good questions. Right. I mean, I could later, but I couldn't then. So I thanked them and went about my way. But yeah, I wanted to get into civilian clothes because in California wasn't a very popular place to be running around at that time back from Vietnam anyway. Yeah, yeah. Did you, when you were over in Vietnam and you were, did you write a lot of letters? Did you have any time to write? What was the kind of communication with home? Because obviously it was pretty much letters. Yeah, you had letters. Well, I'd picked up a little tape recorder, this cheap little thing at the PX. You go in the PX and you go, where's all the stuff supposed to be in the PX? Right. And I would send a tape back to my parents every once in a while. And they could hear artillery in the background. But I never wanted to, you know, everything's just fine, you know, everything's good. Right. and you'd send letters back. Right. And the postage is free. Sure. Did they write a lot to you? Did you get a lot of letters or correspondence from home? Yeah, not a whole lot, but just enough because they'd have mail call. And the mail guy was from California, and he had a rope hanging on his uniform with knots in it. Each knot represented another month he'd spent there. And he was totally out of control. And he got a mailman's hat from the States he wore, and they couldn't deal with him. I mean, he was out of uniform. They just didn't want to deal with him. Right. But he was kind of a MASH-like character. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure he couldn't wait to get back surfing. But you know, it's about, I would say about after 6 months, we'd pretty much gotten rid of all the old guys who came over together, and we were the guys hopefully have been there with you a while, and then new guys coming in. So. Yeah, but yeah, there were times we'd get together. When you got on the ship, they'd try to have beer for you. You could have 2 cans of beer. Okay. And they'd have like a big bucket with ice water in it, and these Falstaff beers would be floating on the top. And you know, right away, that thing's been leaking, so nobody's going to take that. But you could drink 2 beers as fast, you know, you're dehydrated.
Right.
And you had no tolerance for alcohol anyway, but you get usually 2 beers. In the base camp, you could sometimes get more than that. In fact, we did a pig roast once. That was a good time. The Hawaiians, we bought a pig in the village, had it on a spit, had a big fire and charcoal going, and the head medical guy came over and said, "I'm not condoning this." But these guys, they knew how to do it, cook it for a long time.
Yeah.
So we had a pig roast and beer, and that was
That's pretty good.
It's like with sea rations. When I was a platoon sergeant, sea rations come in a big box. Then there's individual rations. You looking at your watch?
Nope.
Well, I thought you
Nope,
got.
I was looking down here. I had a question.
So when you're going like this to me, is that being cut it off?
No, I want to hear about sea rations. I've never cut anyone off yet.
I would always turn the box upside down, open it and turn it upside down, because like I couldn't stand lima beans with ham, and there were some decent ones in there. Otherwise, the guy that can reach the fastest and all got all the good stuff, and what's going to be left is ham and lima beans. So I'd tip them upside down, and you'd randomly have to take a box, and that seemed to be more fair. Also, being liked by the guys is a plus,
Right.
not a negative.
Right.
You don't want to have anybody pissed off at you who's carrying a weapon around and hand grenades. So, and why not treat everybody as fairly as you could? And so that's what I always did. And some of that stuff was not good. And if you could get some C4, that's a plastic explosive, then you'd take a little piece of that and you'd open up like the cracker can, dump the crackers out, and put some air vents in the bottom with your P38. Put the C4 in and light it, and you could put your meal on top of that to heat it. And if you couldn't get C4, you could take the bug repellent and mix it with peanut butter, the little peanut butter jar, and that would burn and you could heat. But you weren't exactly building campfires.
Right.
Now that those helicopter guys, they just go over and open the Peacock and get some aviation fuel out, so they're in good shape. You know.
Wow. What about, you know, a lot of the vets that have come in and have talked about, you know, when they were over there, they would think about the world. When they got back to the world here, you know, there were conversations that said that would start when I'm going to go back, either I'm going to eat or I'm going to do this. Did you have those conversations, and what were you looking forward to coming back to?
Several things you miss at that age in your life. And they aren't all food, but yeah, you know, you'd think about having a steak or you know, a hamburger, drinking water. See, that water was made out of the river, and it was purified, but it had a smell and a taste to it. Some people would put Kool-Aid in it to cover it up. But when I went on R&R, I filled the bathtub up with water and just sat in it.
Yeah.
It was the first thing I did in the room, which cost $7 a night. But yeah, you think about food and friends you miss, and you know, some guys would buy a car. So you get $10,000 insurance somebody's going to get if you get killed. So I always thought that guy that stood up after he got the Dear John letter, I hope he switched his insurance first.
Yeah.
You know, but you don't make much money over there. The people that stayed back here that you know who got married or, as it turned out, went to Canada and then were allowed back in here, they were making money the whole time you weren't making money. Yeah. And that's why, that's probably why you don't hear a lot about Vietnam other than you're doing this thing. You know, we had an AP photographer, 2 of them, and a woman come out with us, and that lasted the first day. They lost all their equipment when we came under fire, and they jumped in a canal. So that was the last time we were filmed. I mean, she was going to follow us around and film our daily lives, and she's getting our names and all. It all looked like something out of the movies, but that never happened.
Huh.
You
Right. It was a lot worse. And so what about when you did come home, how was getting back to normal life?
I was nervous for quite a while. There's a period you have to go through to kind of calm down. Even after I quit working a regular job, it took me months out here to not think about the work anymore. I mean, it took me, now you might leave today, which hopefully they aren't firing you. I know nothing about that.
I hope they're not either, but at least it's on I guess they got a full week out of me.
But you'd think about it if you left here, and I was nervous. You just have to calm down. I mean, some of these guys you're going to interview might drive a truck in a base camp or something, and they've got massage parlors, beer halls, PX where you can go in and buy a candy bar if you want. People cutting their hair, they got people polishing their shoes. Those big base camps with the rear echelon people are not like a combat unit at all.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit jittery.
Yeah. It's hard to go. I imagine you're in Vietnam one day and then you're just coming back home a few days later. That's a pretty tough thing to go from combat to just civilian life.
Yeah, it's you don't exactly just sort of slide into it slowly, but everybody, I imagine, handles it differently. You know, and it's the people that didn't come home or the people that came home with terrible wounds. They're living with that then. That's why it really kind of pisses me off about the VA. And I did want to say something about the VA.
Sure.
This isn't Arizona, but the VA clinic over here, my doctor, I didn't see a doctor for 40 years after I got out of Vietnam because of some experiences with doctors over there. And so I finally saw a doctor. But I have Dr. Van Nice, it's V-A-N-N-I-C-E, and he's a laid-back guy, but a real doctor, and you have to see him at least once a year to stay in the program. And sometimes I see him more than once a year. He said, just check in if nothing's going on. Come over and I can talk to you. I asked him if I have PSD. I said, sometimes I think I'm a little weird. I don't sleep very well at night.
Right.
And he says, no, I don't think you have that. So I said, okay, because I didn't understand what it was. And then I was in the benefits section with a lady, Tina, that's her name, and she was just unbelievably professional. And she could get my records up, even where I signed something when I got back to the States. And I couldn't remember ever doing that. And she said, well, here it is, and she could show me. Very professional lady. And she's the one I took a picture of me wearing my uniform to show her I could still fit in it.
Right.
Because we were kidding about that. But that bottom button is tight.
What about, do you think, what is, for you now looking back, what are the lasting effects? What did Vietnam do for you, positive or negative, for the rest of your life?
Can't stop thinking about it.
Okay.
And as far as I'm concerned, it's affected my sleep. And I mean, it shouldn't. Look how many years it's been. Was it 47 years?
Yeah.
You know, I'm 24 years over there, which was kind of crazy. And yeah, I'm not nervous. I sleep with a gun. Of course, the crime rate's gone up in Billings, and by the time you call the police, somebody might be throttling you. I'm not of the right size to wrestle with somebody. So I sleep with a gun. I've got a carry permit. I've never felt things were that bad in Billings you needed to have a carry permit, but sure. I think the four-legged animals are a bigger threat.
Yeah.
And I keep the deadbolts locked. We lock the car as soon as we get out of it, and we lock the house.
Yeah.
So that did affect me that way.
Yeah. Do you think, let's talk a little bit about, you've never been back to Vietnam since?
No, do you want to go?
No, not necessarily. Just curious.
No, I never have, but they are running vacations over there.
Is that an odd thing? Is that something that you do or not do? I mean, is it ever something you've considered?
Well, not at this point in my life. I'd rather go to Vancouver sometime here and have some fresh crabs and some seafood, you know. But now a friend of mine is going to Vietnam on a river trip, and he's going to go down the Mekong and over into Cambodia. It just holds 60 people. And I sent him an article out of the Wall Street Journal where this guy was eating food over there, and he had snake, and then he asked the vendor what was on the spit, and the guy, he couldn't understand what the guy said, and the guy said, "Woof, woof." He goes, "Oh," because he didn't see many dogs.
Right. One of the things that you gave to me here, it said, and it's important to remember, 58,372 Americans died, and they're on the wall. What do you think of when you either see the wall or remember, because you did in combat, you did see people die, you saw people wounded, you yourself were wounded. How does that, when you, to me, it's not, I don't want to say it's just a number, because it's not. Obviously, there's more going on with me, the reason I'm doing this project. But what do you, when you have a piece of literature like that, what do you think, and what do you hope? Do you think people are remembering it any more, or do you, you know, how does seeing the wall and all those names affect you today?
Well, I was born in Walter Reed Army Hospital,
Okay.
Washington, D.C. So the first person to ever hit me was a captain. And true story.
No, I believe it. It's just a funny coincidence.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing the wall, but it's not on my top list of places to go. Washington, D.C. has a lot of crime, and, you know, who wants to expose yourself to, I mean, this is so calm here. I mean, when I first arrived in Billings, people had their trucks running in the Walmart parking lot, and the door wasn't locked. It just wouldn't happen back east.
Yeah.
And my friend from high school said, you know, there's very little going on, and I like to fish and hike and camp. So this was the place for me. But I guess I wouldn't mind seeing the wall. And the Mobile Riverine Force has a display they travel around with, and they're always having get-togethers. And I do think of the, you know, some of the guys that I was with, where are they now? And I wouldn't mind seeing them, but you don't know if they're going to go to one of those reunions anyway.
Yeah. Do you keep in contact with any of them? I mean, you had a close camaraderie.
Yeah, I had one guy I'd call him every year, and I called, and his wife answered the phone, and she said, "God, Dick, it's so strange you're calling. He just died last night."
Wow.
Must have been in the head. But no, I'm in contact with no one, but I get the newspaper from the 9th Division, and I look on there who died recently, because we were all in the Agent Orange, and it's sort of like, when am I going to get some cancer from that? And I'm in their Agent Orange program at the clinic, but you know, the government didn't recognize that until most of the people already died. Yeah.
Have you had any long-term effects from Agent Orange?
I'm having a long time effect from being here doing this interview. No, I had, finally, my wife complained enough, I went and had a colonoscopy, which is the workup before you do the colonoscopy is sort of like going to basic training in the Army, same type of misery.
Right.
Have you had one before?
I know enough about them.
Okay,
Yeah, no, I'm
that's the worst part.
Yeah, I've heard tell.
And I had one polyp, and the lady said it was just a 1 centimeter, just a tiny little thing, and removed it. 3 days later, she said it tested positive. And she said, and I can't believe it. And I said, well, I'm not believing it either. And she said, well, I just can't believe that little thing could test positive. So I said, they made a mistake. They got the wrong person. She said that 3 times, and then she said, no, you got to come back in, and I got to mark where it was. Well, it means you got to do the same thing again. And I saw the surgeon. He said, well, it's like Russian roulette. It tested positive. If the cancer went through your colon, it spreads to your other organs. or we can remove 6 inches of your colon, and we'll test it. Now, it may not have any cancer, but do you want to not do this? And of course, immediate thought is not do this. Sounds like a good idea. He was a young, impressionable guy. Then he had to look again,
Right.
and it turned out I didn't have cancer in that section, but that was the first surgery I've ever had. And the Billings Clinic was wonderful. It's a great place. I give it high points if you got to do something like that. But so now it's just a matter that wasn't a cancer recognized. Of course, there's a list of only these cancers could be caused by Agent Orange. So you have to get one of those, and then I don't know what happens anyway.
Right. You still got to take care of it, right?
I don't know. I'm not sure what that's all about.
Right.
Maybe they're going to pay your hospital bill or something, but I don't know. I'm in the program, and even those Navy guys that were offshore, they're all out in the ocean because the river is emptied in the ocean.
Yeah.
They're all in the Agent Orange program, but that was fairly recently they got
They just
that
were
going.
The Blue Water Navy, yeah.
Yeah. I was drinking the shit water.
Right, yeah. Yeah, if you got dysentery, you were.
Well, you're drinking they take it out of the river and purify it.
Right.
They do their best.
So it's been 42, 7 years, 48 this year. Well, depending on when you went over, that you've been over there, since you've been over there. That's given you a lot of time, and I know you've done a lot of reading. How do you look at the Vietnam War today differently, or do you, than you did then? How do you look back on that right now?
Well, I never liked the fact that we were restricted by the politicians in the way you fought a war. Mm-hmm. And you should only fight a war to win. And that means kill more of them than they kill of you. Mm-hmm. And with what went on back here in the States, that made it political, and the pressure, because that's what political people do, they bow to pressure. And a war we could have won and would have been over with us as victors. We didn't win, we pulled out, and it sort of reminds me of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Politicians shouldn't run wars, and I've talked to those guys that flew B-52s, and they had to come in a certain way every time. Well, that just made them a target for the rockets. I mean, everything was restricted. And you have to let the military run a war to win a war.
Yeah.
So that was kind of sad, but it's equally bad what's going on right now.
Yeah.
The
So
latest
you see
war.
some parallels between.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's got to be hard. I would imagine as a vet, that's hard to see making the same mistakes ultimately twice.
Yeah, we had some good officers. I mean, I know one night we were dog tired, and our captain got an order to move, and it's pitch dark, it's nighttime, move to another location. And he knows this is going to be really hard on the men. So what he did is he faked it. He said, okay, we're moving to that location, but we're leaving people here at this location as a rear guard, which means this location was off bounds for artillery. And we all stayed there. And what was the point of moving anyway? There was no point. We had one colonel land once, and we hadn't shaved. Well, who shaves when that quart is what you drink? And he gave the captain a razor and said, when all these men shaved, there wasn't any shaving lotion, there wasn't enough water. Right. I mean, stuff like that. That's bad leadership. That's just piss poor leadership.
Amen. And what's it gonna matter? You know, it means nothing. It means nothing. What about when you brought it up here? When you were over there, did you know what the public sentiment was for the war? Did you know that some of the protests were going on back home? Did any of that register, or were you kind of disconnected from that?
Kent State made it into the paper over there.
What did you think of the Kent State? Because that's close to home.
Yeah,
or not home, but where you'd been.
Yeah. Well, you know, the anti-war sentiment, I thought, personally, I think a lot of it was, don't send me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you really anti-war, or are you saying, I don't want to go?
Right.
And that's was the beginning of bad times for this country. I mean, look at Israel. Everybody serves in the military. And would that be a bad idea over here? You got punk kids running around out here in Billings. All they want to do is drink and smoke and break into cars. If they went through military service, they would grow up. And you didn't get a lot of that, what was going on here. You don't have television or or radio to speak of, so I didn't know how bad it was. I got back home, I saw a guy wearing an American flag, and I started across the street, and the guy grabbed me. You know, now if somebody spit on me, then that would have been it. Then it would have been on, but that did go on also, but it didn't happen to me.
Yeah. Did you, when you got home, did Vietnam, besides sleep patterns, and I don't want to minimalize or trivialize that, but did it play into your everyday life, or was it something that you just kind of put in a closet and went on, or how was that experience? Did it change your life? I mean, on a daily basis, was it something that was talked about or even mentioned, or how did that work for you?
No, you very seldom, and I've seen that with a lot of veterans, very seldom do this kind of thing where you talk about it.
Sure.
And it makes me nervous to talk about it.
Sure.
Because I can conjure up in my memory anytime I want or don't want, and I can see a picture of something happening that I might rather forget. And if you do it ongoing like this, it can make me nervous. I mean, I remember the first time I watched that movie, Platoon, it made me just visibly nervous. Those guys out in the jungle on ambush. The other part of it, I was going, God, that wasn't happening. Sure wasn't where I was.
Right.
But that's Hollywood. But I thought they did very well out in the jungle, and you know, with tracers flying around, explosions going off, and it made me nervous. Now I can watch it today. I'm sure I'd be fine.
Right.
But I was always interested in history, so I had to go buy the books at the library that were printed on actions that happened in Vietnam and Mobile Riverine Force. I found a book, so I bought that. Because until you're a sergeant, you're just told to saddle up, we're going out. Well, it'd be nice if you knew where you were going and if you could actually relay that to the men so they knew.
Right.
Or is it all the same? Every day was the same. Every week was the same. The only way you knew what month it was is that you would find out, well, I've been here 2 months, so now I got 10 more months. And the closer you got to leaving, the more you knew what the dates were, because every day was the same.
Yeah, and there wasn't really much differentiation between a weekday, a weekend, a Monday, Tuesday.
No.
And was there any reason to know which day it was?
No. Useless. If you're in a base camp, they could have religious services on Sunday. Mm-hmm. We had a Catholic priest that went to the field with us several times, and I just thought that most of him that he would do that. He didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have been just killed easily.
Yeah.
And of course, he could comfort people that were dying, but he didn't need to be out there. But no, and I remember Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know about that. Of course, you got near Christmas and you're getting near Tet. And you know, well, this is going to be a big holiday, so we're going to be laid back.
Right.
And everything will be fine. Thanksgiving, they brought out food. They had a little menu. And I remember taking the menu and crossing off things and putting what really happened. They bring out these insulated containers, and they tried to get us turkey and things. You know, they do what they can. You got to be flown out in a helicopter, dropped off, and you got to glop it into a dish and eat it. But it was better than sea rations, that's for sure.
Right. Now, you, a lot of guys talk about going in and they dropped weight, whether they wanted to or not, just from water wasn't great, food wasn't great. Was that your experience too? Were you able to?
I think a combat guy puts on muscle and loses fat.
Mm-hmm.
I know my neck got thicker from 3 pounds on the head all the time. I knew what my neck size was when I left, and it got thicker because you got that steel pot, which then you could sit on instead of putting your butt on the wet ground, so it came in handy. But if you were out humping, and I mean, if you're in a combat unit, you're going to get muscle because you're taxing yourself. You're tired. I carried every weapon. I carried the Prick 25 radio for a while, but I got rid of it by signing off on the captain. The captain signs off. It'd say over and out. Right. Well, he didn't like that too much, so the radio went to another guy, thank God. And I think that thing weighed 25 pounds.
Yeah.
The only thing I didn't carry was the machine gun. I carried the M79, every weapon but the machine gun. So
right.
when you all had to spread out ammo for the pig, for the M60, because that guy couldn't carry all he needed, so you'd have bandoliers of that wrapped around you or over your shoulder. So, yeah, that's how I got rid of that radio.
Right. How much would you? How far would you go in a day? How long would you? How far would you go out?
2,000 meters was a lot in the wet season.
Okay.
And then that's if nothing happens, of course.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes you went 20 yards.
and all hell broke loose. What about looking forward? You know, one of the reasons we're doing this is to hopefully preserve it so that people can look back and say, what was it like, and hear voices, people, men and women who served in Vietnam and were over there and could give an account. What do you hope they remember?
Just remember that a lot of people got killed and wounded, and you know, we did our best. You did what you could do. You did what you had to do. So, because, you know, some people talk about it that, you know, they won. No one wants to hear that.
Right.
We pulled out and they won, but we were decimating them down south. I mean, after Tet, we had sporadic contact because we had really wiped them out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was at least a 10-to-1 loss. Only one of ours killed to every 10 of the VC, I believe, was the stat on that one.
In some battles, it could be 10-to-1 for them to win. If you.
Right. No. Yeah. We wiped out 10 of them for every one of us. But
we could have 10 of us in the wrong type of battle. I mean, they lost whole platoons, and you don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bloody. I mean, again, 58,000, more than 58,000 on that wall. Well, what have I? You know, we've talked a lot. I don't. Have we missed anything from your notes? You're the one who kept the script.
Well, as old as I am, I thought I better write down what I remembered. You know, I think we've pretty much gone over most of this stuff. And when I came back, you had time off when you came back to the world, but then I was sent to Fort Riley, of all places.
Where the
original unit had left. And I was put in the 24th Infantry Division. And when I found out they were going to Germany, I thought, hey, great, I finally see something out of this whole thing.
Right.
And they said, yeah, but it's going to be winter maneuvers with shelter halves. And an officer had to come to all of us that had come back from Vietnam and take us in the room, and he apologized first. He says, I have to ask you this, if you'd re-up, extend your career. It was like 100% no thank you.
Right.
But I did ask him, I said, I'm going to go to Germany in the winter for field maneuvers, and I've got 1 month until I get out of the Army. So you're going to fly me to Germany, you're going to be there a while, and you're going to fly me back, and I'm going to muster out. He said, if you can find any school that you can get into any college, you don't have to go. So I found a trimester school back in Columbus, Ohio, because it just continues your degree.
Right.
And didn't have to go to Germany. And these guys were like advanced infantry training guys, and a lot of them wanted to go to Vietnam. And I was thinking, God, isn't this a switch? I say, no, you don't. And one guy tried to commit suicide when I was in charge of all the radios in the barracks. He tried to commit suicide because he wasn't going to Vietnam. And I had to call an ambulance for him.
Wow.
Yeah, well, 18 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that shows the difference of, yeah.
Well, you watched Audie Murphy films and John Wayne films and whatever. Now, officers, they need rank to be anywhere. That if that's their career, they need rank. They need to get decorations. They need the combat infantry badge, which means you've been in combat. And I know during inspections, when we were in our dress uniform at Fort Riley, those guys would come down past us inspecting us, and you're standing there at attention looking down at this salad all hanging on your coat and just leave you alone.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, because they understood that.
They recognize what all that is. And I mean, even in Vietnam, they said, if you'll extend over here, you're getting ready to leave, if you'll extend, we'll make you an E6, and there's a bonus. And I didn't think you had to extend for a year. Well, that next mission, the guy that did extend took one right through the head. That's how random it is.
Right.
I'm going.
You never had, once you got back in your time, you never had did you think that you were going to re-extend?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, never.
They had their chance to kill me. And I did have to go down to the draft board, and that woman was just as nasty as she was the year ago I left. And she started in on something, and I just said, hey, look, I'm mustering out. I'm not coming in. I'm getting out. I probably wasn't very nice about it, but I was approached back in the States by a retired colonel to see if I was interested in, and I'm sure it's because of awards I got. I don't know how he got my name. If I was interested in doing clandestine things for a group that would always deny they didn't know me if something went wrong. It's very strange.
Yeah, that's a heck of an offer.
Very strange.
Right. You turned that one down, I imagine?
Yeah. I'd rather face it off with a deer, and I have a rifle and it's got horns, than and that part about if anything goes wrong, we don't know you.
Yeah.
But that was strange.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks for asking, but someone had thrown my card in the hat somehow. I don't know, but
yeah.
He's just asking. Never said who or
what or why.
But he was military.
Well, I want to say, wow, this is it's been a real honor to hear your story. And
well, let's not go too far.
No, it has been. I wouldn't.
That's embarrassing to some extent.
Well, that's okay. But to hear someone who did that for a year and got the commendations that you did, it's been an honor, and I want to thank you for your service. But I also want to thank you for coming down and doing this. This project, Vietnam would still be forgotten if the vets who served wouldn't do this. I can't do this alone, so thank you for doing that too.
There's got to be plenty more that just don't want to do this, I'm sure.
There have been some, and that's okay. We'll take who we can get, hopefully, and preserve the stories and make it so that people understand it a little bit better. Well, I thank you. This has been Daryl Ehrlich. I've been with Richard E. Tangel. He served with the U.S. Army from 1967 to 68. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening.